Good morning. Great. So thank you so much for participating in these sessions. Now, so because we have only 60 minutes, I'd like to divide this session to 3 parts. So first one is about to understand the current threat landscape. And then the second part is about to talk about the problems and opportunities with our current responses to those threats. And the last but not least is about to talk about the future. How can we do better for our cyber defenses or intelligence sharing? So now I'd like to ask the first question to Mr. Chen.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. I'll give a quick comment, and give an overview of the cybersecurity situation in our part of the world. And I was advised by the moderator we only have like 3 minutes each, so I'll give it a show. This is a tough job. Sometimes you talk less than you talk more. But as you all know, in this part of the world, you can consider Russia as also sort of part of Asia. The originators of the cyber attacks are Russia, North Korea, and China. I'll leave to the expert to talk more about the U.S.-China cyber attack. I think no one is clean. China claims to be the biggest victim of cyber attacks, but they're also one of the biggest attackers on the other side. But I do want to remind people, the audience, there's sort of piece of the cybersecurity issues sometimes kind of like a neglected or underestimated. That is Taiwan. Actually, in the whole situation in the whole Asia Pacific, especially in dealing with cybersecurity issues with China, Taiwan always has a front seat. Unfortunately, in dealing with a lot of not really like a physical cyber attack on the infrastructures, but more in softer ways. We're talking about disinformation, influence operations. And given my experience previously, I worked for a very large social media company. So we worked with the Taiwanese government over the past two presidential elections. So there were a lot of lessons and cases we saw, and particularly because of the language similarities. On the China side, they simplify the Chinese, and Taiwan uses traditional Chinese, but it's pretty easy to manipulate, from a content perspective. And we just, discussed among the panelists, and said, China's attack on Taiwan, it seems, still limited. I think language does matter. It's not easy to, launch, in terms of content, on a foreign language. There are also signs, but unconfirmed evidence that China and Russia probably also cooperate with each other, not necessarily in a very government-to-government systematic level, but perhaps more through just exchanges among the civic groups to share experience and the way how they create the content. It's getting more and more sophisticated. It's even if you talk about disinformation, it's not like on the state news agency level. I think you talk about Xinhua or Interfax, they still try to keep it more official. But there are a lot of like creators, even using foreign creators, not like locals, to sort of manipulate the opinion things, especially during the election time. So I'd like to share more as we have more discussions. But I think I just want to put Taiwan on the spot, on the agenda, especially in this part of the world. We could use Taiwan as a case study and maybe also share some lessons. I'll pause here. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chen, to talk about the Taiwan, and especially it's really timely to talk about the elections because that's something coming up in Tokyo soon, in Japan soon. So, Matsukawa Sensei, would you like to talk about Japan's what kind of threats Japan is facing?
Yes. Yes. The general election actually starts from tomorrow. So I shouldn't be maybe here, but last night I came back from Osaka, and I'm flying back to Osaka after this lunch. But it's really happy for me to be here and talk about this very important issue. For Japan, the cyber attack to Japan has been increased both in quality and quantity. So once in 14 seconds, now there is a cyber attack. 2.2 million packets per one IP address last year. So it's really huge. And most of the originator is from foreign countries like China especially. And the target is not just private companies, but governments like NISC, National Center of Incident Readiness and Strategy for Cybersecurity, was actually the mail system was attacked last year, and 3 years ago, JAXA was also a target. And so, the government facilities, government itself, Japanese government itself is also a target, becomes a target. And the other part, inequality, is the way has become more sophisticated, advanced. So long time positioning. So you are normal, proper address, and then you stay in the system for a long time till the time you actually do the attack. And so it's really very dangerous for important infrastructure or like a satellite system. In case when it comes to emergency. So peacetime you're just watching, and then when it comes to you go for the emergencies, you start attacking, and then the infrastructure is shut down, and then now going to the real attack. That is, and then also at the same time there will be like Taiwan case, the hybrid. Recognition warfare also starts in the internet, So the other important feature is now becomes the cybersecurity is important, not just a peacetime, but for the emergency time. And it's seamless. And the hybrid warfare. So these things is something that we have to really pay attention to. And you can just recall what happened in Ukraine crisis. They did all this, the cyber attack before the real attack. And that was the same for the Crimea case too. And so Japanese government is now trying to, I will maybe talk later, but is trying to establish a new system, better response system with the private sector and the government sector cooperation, and responding to these new emerging threats in a seamless manner from peacetime to emergencies. And we have to remember that the unlimited warfare by China now becomes the matter of the fact now for all over the world. So thank you.
Thank you, Matsukawa Sensei, to talk about it's a great way to start talking about the precursors to the new upcoming legislation on active cyber defense to deal with seamless attacks in peacetime and wartime against the critical infrastructure. So speaking about that, because Hiroshi-san, you are the expert on the protection of critical infrastructure. Would you like to talk about it, the threats to critical infrastructure services?
Yes, nice to meet you all. So my name is Hiroshi Sasaki. I'm a expert of the industrial cybersecurity. So from my viewpoint, I want to address the growing threat to Japan's critical infrastructure with ransomware emerging a major concern. Recent incidents such as the Nagoya port and some hospitals in Osaka and Tokushima prefecture. So highlight this. According to the report from the National Police Agency (NPA), the report said the ransomware incident reached a record high in the half of the 2024 with 128 cases, so up from the 112 last year. And the report said there's also a rising threat from the misuse of AI. And AI tools are increasingly accessible, and even those without technical expertise can use, now to create harmful programs. So actually, the arrests have already been made for using the generative AI to develop the malicious codes this May. And additionally, I'd like to emphasize on the ongoing digital transformation, DX, in sectors like remote maintenance and remote control, and is expanding the attack surface. So earlier this year, a Chinese hacker group exploited a vulnerability in the solar power monitoring system in Japan, 800 devices at the same time. So at that time, these attackers utilize this monitoring device to, the financial theft through the remote control, while the impact on the, power, systems was not conducted. But imagine that, the potential for larger scale attacks on the critical IoT, IoT infrastructure would be a significant risk. Importantly, the many targeted companies are small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, with limited resources. In fact, NPA report says 70% of the SMEs will be targeted, and on the other hand, 30% of the big enterprises. So this suggests that digital supply chain would be a good entry point for the attackers. So we need to consider the potential risk of the widespread disruption. This is my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Hiroshi-san, because it's really concerning to see the increasing attacks to target the weakest link of our defenses, especially the small and medium-sized companies. And the attackers are taking advantage of generative AI and the AIs. So, Scott, maybe you can talk more on how the attackers are taking advantage of the emerging technologies.
Sure. So thanks, everyone, and good morning. So, yeah, I mean, like the idea of some of these emerging technologies being used for the attacks that are taking place is actually quite interesting. Before I get into that, I do want to just talk briefly, even though I only have a brief amount of time, 3 minutes, to try and get this point across. So when we talk about attacks, like let's focus on the distinction between nation state and e-crime attacks, right? Adversaries that are in it for, supporting their nation versus adversaries that are in it for financial generation. And from the nation state side of the house, it's really all about, for Japan anyways, and the Asia Pacific region as a, kind of broader aperture, it's all about China and North Korea more than anything else, right? China is conducting more attacks, as mentioned, than probably any other nation on the planet. And it's primarily focused on intellectual property theft and trying to help the government achieve the stated goals as part of the China 2025 plan and any of the current 5-year plans that are depending on where we are in the cycle. On the other hand, North Korea, cut off from the world banking system, they have no choice but to basically launder money back into the country, and the best way to do that is through currency generation operations. And that generally is about like targeting cryptocurrency exchanges and trying to get bit mining software on every one of your PCs that you guys are running, right? So those are the major kind of nation state side of the house. I know it's like, really exciting to talk about Russia. They're always in the news for doing, ABC, XYZ. But generally speaking, we don't really need to worry too much about Russia unless we're talking about like social media and influence operations. And that's when we potentially start getting into some of the technological side of the house. E-crime. I want to mention e-crime briefly because Hiroshi-san mentioned the ransomware component. Ransomware continues to run rampant all across the planet. It is the #1 greatest threat. While we're all concerned about intellectual property theft from China, ransomware is everywhere. You can probably read about ransomware attacks in the news each and every single day. There's always something going on. Now, to kind of shift gears into the emerging trends area when it comes to technology that's being leveraged by adversaries, excuse me, this is where, probably Gen AI becomes a huge component. Gen AI sufficiently lowers the barrier to entry for adversaries that aren't overly skilled to be able to conduct attacks. So you can use something like ChatGPT or Copilot, etc., to create a very simple piece of malware. That is a huge threat that's happening today. But then also, it was mentioned that language is an issue, right? When it comes to, say, the Chinese trying to conduct an attack and maybe trying to mimic the language of the victim that they're trying to attack. Well, previously, that was probably a little bit more difficult. I'm sure each and every one of us has received an email that had some very sketchy sounding English in it, right? You're like, this is so obviously not written by a native English speaker or even a fluent English speaker. Gen AI changes that substantially. Gen AI will allow a Chinese adversary, a Russian adversary, a North Korean adversary to create very simple and easy to understand lures with perfect English. So that's something that we're seeing quite a bit of. But Gen AI is really the future, right? It's allowing adversaries to leverage that technology to then easily conduct attacks. Easily think about an attack sequence from A to Z, from basically entering the front door to basically walking out that front door with your jewelry box or your safe that's filled with money and important papers and etc. Gen AI makes that very, very easy. It sufficiently lowers the barrier. Having said that, to date, So what we call interactive intrusions in the industry, which means people that have their hands on the keyboard. Actually, interactive intrusions over the last year are up 55%, which suggests that Gen AI isn't yet conducting attacks to the degree that the media and people are worried about. So it's a trend that we need to keep an eye on. And also, we're all quite familiar with the social media influence that's taken place. Something else that we need to be cognizant of is the, kind of what we call the post-truth era with all the influence operations that's taking place on social media. So I think I'll stop there and then we'll get into, I guess, some of the other conversations. But yeah, social media is probably the battleground that we need to really pay attention to.
Great. So the first part is gives us an opportunity to really understand the deep aspects of the current threat landscape from ransomware attacks and also Gen AI or AI-enabled attacks on the social media, on also the cyberspace. So, Mr. Chen, you talked a little bit about the influence campaigns and also disinformation campaigns from China against Taiwan, but maybe would you like to talk more about how Japan can learn lessons from Taiwan responses?
Thanks. Actually, Scott, took a perfect lead. I can follow up more on the social media part. Some of you may know, back to 2018, the Taiwanese government was at one time seriously thinking about making some legislations, following the Singapore model. As you know, the Singapore made the famous or infamous legislation called a POFMA, which gave every single executive the cabinet member power, to labor, what is true, what is not true. But it's always, not really a good idea for the government to tell the people, what is true or what not. Sometimes, the power, especially, if the power, got abused, by some politicians. Eventually, the Taiwanese government didn't take the legislative path because Taiwan is a democracy, so they're more concerned about side effects of free speech. At that time, Audrey Tan, who was also a G1 speaker before, so she was the first digital minister. I think she was definitely more leaning on the free speech part. And then instead, the Taiwanese government put a lot of efforts on sort of campaign, like public movement, public education to get really try to get everyone involved, aware, and using some very creative ways, like a cartoon, comic, not like the traditional government propaganda to tell you what is true, what is not true, and how to identify disinformation. So that worked quite a bit. Even the kids, like in primary school in Taiwan, they got a sense of digital literacy, like media literacy. And I think this is something Taiwan in terms of digital literacy level, from at least from the public education perspective, it's pretty high among all the Asian countries. This is something the rest of Asia Pacific. I know some countries are also trying to catch up in that. Maybe also a reference for Japan. The truth is, if you think about when you first got on internet, no one really teach you how to use the internet, right? It's not like you buy a refrigerator. There's a menu like, you should put the fish in the frozen dock, right? You put drinks. No one teach you that, and the internet gets more and more sophisticated. Compared with 20 years ago, we just use email, and now you talk about Scott talk about AI, and deepfake. No one teaches about that. But so somehow everyone needs better education to get a little bit sense on protection. The other part is the silver group, the aged group, the elderly group is also becoming the easy target for cyber attack, especially social media, because you can't imagine like how people use, for example, in Taiwan, lying is more popular. In Japan too, lying is becoming the primary source of disinformation. So especially during the election time, like this scandal, that scandal, you can't verify, especially things happen, so quickly. But I'm not saying like the government should not just forget the legislation part. I think we can we should be more aware of the balance between legislative approach and how to still foster more free discussions in the society.
Yeah, so thank you so much for talking about the background and why the Taiwanese government didn't pass the legislation on disinformation, and also we sometimes forget to highlight the importance of the awareness raising on online, how to use an online safely. And in Japan, the telecommunication service providers provide online education for kids and adults. And also the local police provides online education for elderly people because they have network in the local community. So speaking of registration, everybody must be curious to know more about the upcoming registrations on the active cyber defense, Mr. Matsukawa sensei.
You can call me Rui, that's fine. But anyway, I totally agree with the Chen-san that the raising awareness is also a very important area, and which is, I think Japan needs to work really, really hard on. So Taiwan could be a good example for us to follow. And regarding what Japanese government is trying to do for tackling the cybersecurity issue, the thing is Japan is very much behind the cyber security area, the legislation and also the organization, and then also even the personnel, the number of the personnel needs to be bringing into this area. But because we are behind, we can maybe pick up a best part of the best practices with the other countries. And originally we are planning to pass the legislation this autumn, but I think it's maybe because of the election and all that may be difficult. Most practically speaking, next diet session next year, we are going to pass the certain legislation to give the authority to the governments to do more effective cybersecurity with the private sectors, especially the basic important infrastructure companies like electricity or port, or maybe the nuclear facilities, or all these important areas. The key word is government leadership of the government. Government will take responsibility to actively give the information or the protection to these important facilities. If possible, of course, if we can do that to all the private companies or even to the small, medium-sized companies, it's great, but it's not realistic. So the target is basically the important infrastructure. And then the second keyword is the private government partnership of the different level. We will have a very high level of the close cooperation with the government and the private sectors. And government will create another layer of the cybersecurity center. Well, there is no term settled yet, but the NISC, which is already existing, will be reorganized and upgraded to a much better functional having a commander control organization. And that will give, we are thinking about giving the mandatory, the obligation to the basic infrastructure company to report to this organization, the new created organization, if they get attacked. You shouldn't hide it. These important, designated companies, facilities needs to report once it's attacked. And then the government will take care of the protection. That's one thing. The other thing is, the companies can report to one-stop, this one organization. No need to go to METI or no need to go to Agriculture Ministry or all this, even though you are belonging to certain sectors. So one-stop service. And lastly, government will be given the authority to detect and find and react and deal with the case. that is necessary. Currently, the government is not given this authority. So we have to have the legislation to give the governments to respond and tackle. That we call a whole system as an active cyber defense. Some people use this active cyber defense is a sort of like hacking back and destroy the foreign, the server of the foreign in the foreign soil, but which is not. We use it in much broader sense. Although this type of the hack back and then delete the origin of the threat is necessary in emergencies, which is also should be allowed. But what the government is trying is targeting by legislation and reorganization. Next diet is about the peacetime. But again, coming back to the first point, peacetime and emergency is seamless. You cannot really detect, till this time is peacetime from this emergency. It's more a seamless world. Hybrid warfare is the fashionable thing. So although what we target at the next diet is about basically the peacetime organization, but it should have a very close connection with the emergencies. And actually, the defense, who will be the operator? Well, of course, in Japan or maybe in any country, it's the self-defense forces and also the police agencies that has the capability to do that. So that's the basic idea. And lastly, we need to have the level of because we already passed the security clearance legislation in a previous diet, we can have much better cooperation with much high level of sensitive information sharing with the companies, which if they have the security clearance. And also, we are targeting to have the comfortable level of the ability to work with the other advanced nations. Otherwise, without international corporations, currently you cannot really tackle with the foreign origined, foreign state-owned enemies. So that's the other necessity. Lastly, the cyber intelligence is also necessary. That's another target we have to tackle in the future. Well, actually, from now. Thank you.
Thank you, Matsukawa sensei. So it sounds so it sounds like the legislation of the active cyber defense is creating the whole new ecosystems to incorporate public sectors, but also private sectors to share more on the cyber threat intelligence to respond to cyber threats more proactively, and also to collaborate with the international community, and enabled by the new Economic Security Promotion Act. On the broader security clearance systems. So Hiroshi-san, would you like to talk more about the responses?
Yeah, actually, Matsukawa sensei talked about the policy part. So I'd like to add the one operational part of the supply chain protection. So as I mentioned in the last my comments, the SME is one of the very big point of the critical infrastructure protection. So, but as you know, the SMEs has a very few resources for covering the budget and human talents, and so it is very difficult problem. So sometimes governments are offering the subsidies or the free services around, so it isn't enough for them, because once the support ends, they often fall back to the old habits. So this is true. So what really works is ongoing. I believe is ongoing expert guidance to the help SMEs understood 5 security measures are crucial. So this is the awareness part is very important, I think. For example, so Japan has over 20,000 certified cybersecurity professionals. So if we can use these experts to support a local SMEs part-time or through resource sharing scheme, so it would also greatly help with awareness and secure digital transformation. So this is my comment. Thanks so much. I will cut.
Thank you. So, Scott, maybe you can use Gen AI to speak faster to answer our question.
Maybe I can just use a deep fake in Gen AI just to speak, on my behalf. I guess in this area, from the sharing perspective, I think there's a few thoughts that I have. I think the first thought and what's most important to me is the idea of inter-industry sharing through like information sharing and analysis centers. This is something that's worked extremely well for the financial services industry. You know, arguably the largest ISAC in Asia Pacific is the financial services industry, ISAC. A lot of sharing happens there. It's a closed community and it works very, very well. And we don't see that across too many other industries within the region and, you know, in particular here in Japan. There's definitely some sharing communities, you know, but I'd like to see more sharing communities because at the end of the day, what makes the sharing communities like these so valuable is you build close relationships with the partners in those sharing communities and you build trust. Sharing is all about trust. The government can tell you, hey, you need to tell us A, B, C, X, Y, Z, but oftentimes organizations don't share because they're worried about the implications from sharing with the government. Like, what does that mean? Am I going to get fined? Is it going to make its way into, you know, some public record? And then now all of a sudden the stock price takes a hit as a result of this, you know, announcement. So the sharing communities to me is like a huge component of what makes the, you know, responses to these threats really important. And also, no one organization has the full picture, right? So if you think about the financial services side, there's banks all across APAC. Banks that are being hit by attacks here in Japan are probably seeing similar attacks from those in Singapore, but also substantively different attacks. So, you know, if we plot this all on, say, a Venn diagram, it's going to be a very, you know, small area that overlaps between all of these organizations, which makes the sharing important because now you have data that you can use to implement stronger defenses within your own organization. So information sharing is a huge component. I'd also say that the idea of the use of threat intelligence is extremely important. This is not something that I see all too often across the region, and in particular in Japan. When we talk about threat intelligence, what I'm not talking about is the use of like tools that are for, say, monitoring the deep and the dark web. They certainly have their place in, in a cybersecurity strategy. But what I'm really talking about is the type of intelligence that helps you understand what are the tactics, the techniques, and the procedures that sophisticated adversaries like those from China, North Korea, the e-crime adversaries, looking at like intelligence that helps you understand how those adversaries conduct attacks, being able to use that proactively to then implement resilient defenses to then decrease the possibility of an actual attack being effective. This is, I think, another area where I'd like to see, some improvement, and I think we can get there. And I'll talk about this in probably my, the next component. I'll go into a little bit more detail there. But I think those are probably the, the two areas that I'm most, I guess, passionate about. And then I guess, another thing to say just on the government side, Hiroshi-san kind of mentioned about this, with incentives, right? Having some incentive to share. Just like mandating sharing isn't enough. There needs to be, a carrot along with the stick, right? So what is the incentive? Is the incentive, like Hiroshi-san said, some kind of ongoing assistance for those SMEs that allows them to maintain, a certain level of cyber defense that keeps them protected enough so that they're not going to generally be hit by a successful attack from those sophisticated adversaries. So I think those three areas are the most, the ones that I'm most passionate about, and I kind of look forward to seeing what everyone else has to say after this. But thank you. Hopefully I sounded Gen AI enough for you.
Yeah, you sounded really Gen AI. Thank you. So thank you so much. So now we have like 24 minutes left, but now I'd like to have the final sessions talk about how can we do better for our cyber defenses within 3 minutes or maybe 2 minutes. Thank you. So Mr. Chen.
I'll be quick. I think the U.S. government is definitely leading efforts, to share information, with major partners, through the, especially during Biden administration, the trilateral, the network, works much better than, the Korea and Japan as partners, work much better than any other time. But again, I think, there might be also consideration for more like within Northeast Asia, how the governments can share information, more independently, right? You guys have election very soon. What are the patterns, the content we saw from the Taiwan election or from other countries? As Scott is the expert. The attack groups from China are more or less the same, and China's getting more sophisticated. It's not necessary. I agree. Russia and China, the attack style is very different. We saw a lot of so-called state-sponsored groups. It's a mixture of not necessarily like always directly from PRA, but there's a lot of like civic groups, either paid or somehow they're just like very passionate nationalists try to do the right things in their view. So there are a lot of similar patterns we can draw from the existing incidents. I give you one example. My final panelists talk about critical infrastructure, but I also want to draw the attention to how to define critical infrastructure, right? And yes, we talk about airport, we talk about railways, but it's 7-Eleven critical infrastructure. It's social media critical infrastructure. And there was a real case in Taiwan during the last Tsai Ing-wen's second election. The convenience stores in Taiwan were under attack. Like everybody suddenly went to 7-Eleven, went to Family Mart, saw the screen with the same message: Taiwan is part of China. Like, how does that have psychological impact on the Taiwanese people? Even before you talk about real infrastructure, like grid got attacked, right? Everyone was like, wow, if they can, send the message through the nationwide, the convenience store network, what else can they do? So that's, I just want to put the thought, there, in terms of infrastructure. And again, I think we should really share information intelligence, in terms of those case studies.
Matsukawa sensei.
Totally agree with you. Threat to intelligence international cooperation is really critical. I like the GLOBIS way. I would like to have two proposals. One, to raise awareness. I think we should newly create a minister in charge of only cyber, so that he or she can raise a flag for the general public that you need to pay attention to your own company's cybersecurity, or like your disinformation in the cyberspace, like SNS also. The second proposal is we have to. It's not a proposal. It's actually the basic policy. I think Japanese government and Japan, of all the the relevant people needs to work together, is to establish ecosystem of cyber. You need to have a cyber people, young people maybe, work for the cybersecurity company or a cybersecurity center of the government, right? And then how can you be a cyber person? You need to learn, right? Well, is there a cyber branch in universities or high schools or cyber tech schools? I think we have to have this ecosystem. Young people go to, government the minister for cyber raise a flag. This is important area. You will purpose. You get the money, if you work there. Your future is bright. Then the young people go to a cyber branch of the universities or the high schools. And then this person maybe work for the cybersecurity center of the government. And then, he will be, I have a, very credit working at the cybersecurity center of Japanese government. Then he can graduate from that center. Then he can make start a startup, new startup for the cybersecurity company, being and then these newly startup companies can help small, medium-sized companies of Japan to better react and respond to cyber threat. Right? This kind of ecosystem is necessary. So that's my the necessary thing I think we have to tackle. Thank you. Sorry, I was.
Okay, so I'd like to add one thing about the future countermeasures. So, in my perspective, though, in the future, we will have the nice intelligence among the national corporation and industrial corporation. But how the one challenge is how do we distribute the information to the whole supply chain? So as everybody says, the awareness is key. So that I think that we need some systems for the distributing the intelligence to the whole industry with a proper sensitiveness. So this is a very important issue. So, but I think that this will be solved by using the generative AI for some people would like to know some information from the government. So some AI database out here, and he would get the proper sensitive information from the database. So I think this will be nice for the future. So this is my comment.
So Scott, please conclude.
So I guess I'm kind of in agreement with most of my partners here on stage. I'm really passionate about the ecosystem piece, right? It's all about building a pipeline of professionals, and it has to start at a young age. Like when children are in school, they have to be exposed to security. They have to have the awareness and be taught it. Then they get interested in it. And then maybe in high school, they become more interested in it, go to university, etc. So I don't think that there's, as huge of an ecosystem here in Japan as there is in some of the other countries. I'll use the US as an example just because I think I'm an example of what I'm trying to, kind of explain. So I got interested in computers when I was, a little guy, studied it in high school. Then I decided I'm going to join the US military. I got a lot of training when I was in the Navy on computers, and then went into security. I was at basically the forefront of security. I'm going to age myself here by saying in 1994, I was working on firewalls. So 1994, so long time ago, right? And that then led to me departing the Navy and working for the US government, which then I did for, between the two, a total of almost 25 years. Then I moved into private industry. And so we don't see a lot of that here in Japan, and I'd love to see an ecosystem built that doesn't have to mirror it, but it has to be somewhat similar, where from that small age all the way to an adult, you're building out your career, you're building out your expertise, your capabilities. There's multiple tracks that you can follow in security or in cyber. That I think is what's going to make Japan like a force to be reckoned with and to be at the forefront of cyber, is through that kind of program. How that works is, I think, up for debate, because there's many ways that can happen. And then probably the last thing that I'll mention is threat intelligence once again. So on the regulatory side of the house, I'd love to see the idea of some form of cyber threat intelligence principles added to the regulations to basically, ensure that organizations are investing in intelligence, so that way they can act proactively to thwart those, very sophisticated adversaries like China, like North Korea, like the cyber criminals, etc., from being successful in those attacks. And probably the final note I'll mention is Gen AI, kind of like what Hiroshi-san was saying on the government side, to kind of, be able to pull out sharing data is, I think, a fantastic idea. And this Gen AI is also going to revolutionize the Chief Information Security Officer side of the house as well. You're going to see amazing advancements in how Gen AI is going to basically allow CISOs to be far more effective at their jobs today than they have been in the past. And I think these three areas are the areas of the future that we need to look at. Thank you.
Thank you. So I hope the audiences now have a clear understanding on how to create a good ecosystems to have the good public-private partnerships, but also awareness raisings to understand the social media-enabled disinformation campaigns to state-sponsored or e-crime operations in the cyberspace. So now we have 15 minutes left for a Q&A session. Do you have any question? Oh. So many questions. So, sir, in the front row, would you like to ask?
Thank you. My name is Atushi Nishiguchi. I'm a management consultant and teaching at here, GLOBIS University. If I were China or Russian side, I would take combination approach, not only cyber, but bring and sending a spy to inner circle of target institution. Does anyone know such a kind of example and any suggestion to how to react or how to take a preemptive action for that approach?
So we have so many questions. I'd like to collect in 3 questions in each time. Okay.
Thank you. Romain Caillot with CIPA Partners. I have a question about the impact of quantum computing on cybersecurity. Can you comment on that? Thank you.
Okay.
Steve Monahan, Finn Murray. I work in financial services, and I too was going to raise the quantum computing because there was a recent announcement that a major competitor in the region has cracked military-grade cryptography. The second thing is the primary driver of cyber risk is usually insider threat, and the same country also weaponized their entire immigrant population that they must take action with leverage against them from an insider threat standpoint. So I would be interested to understand the panel's view as to how Japan might counter those 2 threats.
Okay. Great. So we have 4 questions. And so you can take any of the questions. So Mr. Chen.
Okay, maybe I'll touch on I think you talk about the espionage case and the insider threat. Based on my experience, I work for larger Silicon Valley companies. I think, those companies, are definitely much better prepared, than Asian companies. Inside, no matter, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, you mentioned, you talk about, there are internal teams, to keep an eye on those things. According to my knowledge, they also work with FBI, very closely. Sometimes, FBI will share some signals, cases with those big tech, and then they will also report back to FBI if there are any suspicions. Of course, there are a lot of confidential cases, but I'm pretty sure during my time at my last social media company, there were some cases successfully disrupted, by the U.S. Agencies. And I think I completely agree with that gentleman. I think the insider threat is the worst of the worst. From outside, you can still see like where the original attack. And sometimes the insider threat can be just hidden there like for years, and then suddenly broke up. Those things the impact could be like just disastrous, estimated. So that is a sort of spotlight, because a lot of the, especially during the economic downturn, a lot of companies try to save money, internally on IT defense. And then, we had a great airline, Cathay Pacific, and I love it. They laid off a lot of IT staff, during the bad years. And what happened was, and then right after, 1 year, I remember there was like a large data leak, also very sophisticated. I don't have to explain, but that's a classic case, like why you still need the money to have a good team internally for those defense. Those money cannot be saved. So I'll pause here.
I guess I'll address maybe the insider threat and the espionage piece. So actually, the espionage one is an interesting question that you ask. Because there was a story in the media a few months back, a company named KnowBe4 actually had noticed some odd activity from a relatively new hire, and turned out to be, long story short, that there was an actual North Korean agent that had been placed inside the organization and was that, traditional espionage threat and that insider threat. So it kind of hits on both sides of the coin, right? In fact, the group, the North Korean group that's responsible for that attack has actually placed, so-called agents inside about 100 different known companies currently. So, the espionage piece is something that is actually happening. And we're talking about North Korea. We're not even talking about what China's doing. And we all know that China is doing, very similar things to North Korea and is, getting folks employed into, multinationals and being able to do the very same thing. Now, from the insider threat perspective and, really like it's all about the detection component of it, right? And if we think about, the attacks that are taking place today versus what transpired, years ago, traditionally, the defenses were focused on what's hitting our perimeter. But there's no such thing as a perimeter anymore, right? Because we're using, Microsoft Office in the cloud, we're using Azure, AWS. There's no more on-prem data centers, so, I mean, not no more, but, very little compared to what there was previously, right? So there's that to, kind of keep into consideration. There's also to keep into consideration that most of the attacks that happen today are perpetrated through phishing and spear phishing, right? So the attacker doesn't even have to do anything overly exciting in order to gain access into the network. And then once they're on the network, they're then exfiltrating data. So the reason I mention this is organizations need to have robust detection capabilities for being able to understand what's leaving the network. Because when it comes to insiders, it's all about what is leaving the network. And insiders from a, detection perspective are practically no different than outsiders, because say for example, a China-based adversary, they're going to do a low and slow attack. It's going to take, maybe months or years to develop, and then they're going to slowly leak data out. That's not too dissimilar from an insider who is trusted. They're not going to take like a terabyte of data and just suddenly start dropping it on, say Box or Dropbox or Google Drive. They're going to slowly leak that data out. So I guess the long story short here is addressing it in a way that organizations have the right detection capabilities and visibility to understand what kind of activity is happening on their networks. That's really the best way. And then secondarily is, making sure you're doing due diligence on your people. In the case of KnowBe4, they did the due diligence, everything looked legit, but they still had those detection capabilities in place and were able to see the nefarious traffic going out. So I think a combination of all that is, kind of how you address this situation.
Yes. For Japan, that is another huge area that we have to tackle from the scratch. Not scratch, but from a lot. That is intelligence. And one thing is about we need to have the anti-espionage legislation to make it possible to actually detect and arrest these people if we find one. So that is the one area that we need to do. And the other thing is we have the foreign intelligence branches in foreign ministry or like a defense ministry or in the police agencies. Each of them has certain foreign intelligence branch, but it's not there. We don't have integrated foreign intelligence agency like CIA. But I think we need to have one, and that also needs to include the cyber intelligence. So that's another thing. But for now, I think with the security clearance could work to some extent to secure, if it is really an important area of information you need to protect, maybe you can request the security clearances to these people. That's actually helps somehow to block these the espionage, spies. That's one area. But we need to work hard. Thank you.
Hiroshi-san, maybe you can talk about the quantum computing.
Oh, it's not familiar. It's not my familiar area, but now I reset my mind. Okay. So about quantum computing, actually, it is a big problem for the cybersecurity because in the near future, so the encryption doesn't work for the it is very vulnerable for the attackers. But currently, so we don't have a right solution about that. So I think so. If you have some any good ideas about the mitigation of the this problem, so do you know that? So actually, I don't know that. So because it's very difficult things. So maybe we need to start the create a system. So depending on the not depending on the encryption so much. So do you have any idea about that?
No.
Oh, yeah. That's good.
But I mean, I'd say that it is an issue that needs to be addressed. I mean, quantum computing is something that people have been talking about for years, right? And so it's obviously an issue that needs to take place. A discussion that needs to take place now. Like, how do we solve this? Certainly, there's people that are way smarter than I am. Professor Hiroshi, by the way. So there's people way smarter than I am who probably have much better ideas on how to solve this situation. But having said that, it's all going to be conceptual until there's actual attacks that are out there that can hit on that. And looks like we have maybe a follow-up question to that.
It's not a question. It's just that NIST in the US is doing
INST.
I'm sorry. It's not a question. It's just that I would point you towards what NIST is doing in the US. I think that they're already very heavily pushing quantum computing standards and quantum encryption for the reason that you're not going to see an announcement, the guy that really matters who cracks it. So it was almost surprising to see the article today. But there is very good work being done in the US on this right now.
And I'm not an engineer, on that part, but as you know, during Biden's time, apart from AI and semiconductor, quantum computing is also an area that he issued an executive order to limit the technology export, anything to do with quantum computing, even through cloud to China, because, so far you only have US, China taking the lead in quantum computing. So if you think about the future, you leave to the two big nations, which country will take the lead in this area, it's pretty, scary.
So to add something on the quantum computing, so Japanese some of the Japanese industry members are already working on the post-quantum encryption, so the quantum encryption, including the Toshiba and NTT. So, sir, would you like to answer the last question? And very short, please, if you don't mind.
Yes, Yoshinori Ogawa from Praeryx. How to increase the number of cyber defense professionals and experts, creating an institute or giving a scholarship to the young generation, and how to fill the gap between now until the people are there. Thank you.
So as a moderator, I'm going to leverage my power to ask that question to Hiroshi-san, because you've been working on that for years.
Thank you so much for a good question. So actually, in my perspective, of course, the cybersecurity personnel is a shortage right now. But my perspective in this digital, cyber physical era, so we need to educate the operators and every business person to learn the cybersecurity. So that means for example, if you pick up some operators from the factory, so you learn, you educate the cybersecurity for them, so you can get a new cybersecurity workforce in your company. So this is one of the I think so. Not only the educating this nurturing the cybersecurity personnel, so we need to increase people who understand the cybersecurity. So this is my point. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So we have 1 minute and 30 seconds left. So would you like to give 30 seconds to conclude these sessions? Mr. Chen, 30 seconds.
Okay, two points. I think, as I mentioned, information sharing within Northeast Asia region. The US is doing a great job, but I think, the Korea, Japan, plus Taiwan should also, do your own, exchanges. The other thing is education. We talk quite a bit about. I think this is very much related to awareness.
Scott?
I don't really have much more to add to that, because those are two amazing ideas, other than to say we need to see more threat intelligence usage across the industries here in Japan.
Matsukawa sensei?
Well, with new government, with new prime minister, I think it's now for Japan to tackle the real fundamental issues like this, cybersecurity and also the intelligence. And Japan has a lot to do. Seriously, compared with the other countries, lots to do. But I think it's high time for us to go pretty aggressively for exploring the new pages, so that we can work together with the other countries like US or South Korea or the Taiwan or those the countries that share the same strategic concern. Thank you.
People awareness is the key.
Thank you so much. So please join me thanking the panelists.